Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast. We are live on the postcast following the Timberwolves win over the Dallas Mavericks. Marney Gellner of Bally Sports North joins the show to break down the game. The Locked On Wolves postcast starts right now.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm joined by Marney Gellner from Bally Sports North. We're going to talk about the Timberwolves win over the Dallas Mavericks. And Marney, this one had a little bit of everything. It was great offense early for the Wolves, fantastic defense for most of the first 2.5 quarters of this game as the Wolves built a 26-point lead. Then, of course, it still comes down to the final possession, and the Timberwolves ultimately hang on to win in really a thriller, really.
It was, yeah. Most of the game was not a thriller, but for sure the final couple minutes were. Dallas just came absolutely charging in the fourth quarter. Kyrie Irving, 26 points in the fourth quarter. I mean, It was incredible to watch that man work and cook, but I had to wonder where he was for the first three quarters if he had this just kind of brewing inside him, because the Mavericks probably could have used it a little earlier, but I ain't going to complain. That final possession was just awesome.
Yeah, and let's start there. I mean, so Kyrie, this was his first game in Dallas, his, I think, fourth game with the Mavs, only the second game playing with Luka Doncic, who had missed Kyrie's first couple games with Dallas. So first game, they're both playing in Dallas together. First game, Kyrie's playing in the arena, and the crowd's going nuts. Kyrie has a quiet start to the game, a really loud fourth quarter. The Timberwolves keep Anthony Edwards on him down the stretch after Irving opened the fourth quarter with Ant on the bench, and Kyrie had really, like you said, 26 points in the fourth. But then 13 seconds left. Mike Conley had just split a pair of free throws, so it's a 3-point game. And after the timeout, the Mavericks come out. Clearly, their plan was to just kind of flatten out and let Kyrie and Luka just pass it back and forth. Whoever can get a shot off, get a shot off. And I'm sure they wanted to get one off earlier to try and get an offensive rebound, but they literally did not get a shot off in the final 13 and a half seconds. McDaniels tips the ball into the backcourt. And then it was really kind of back and forth where both Jaden and Ant were contesting potential shots from both superstars of the Mavericks. I mean, we're talking about two of the very best ISO players in the entire league, really of the last, I don't know, decade probably, right? If we're talking about Luka and Kyrie, how crazy was that combination of skill level, length, athleticism, all that from Jaden and Anthony Edwards, completely not even letting them get a shot off was just incredible.
It was one of the best defensive possessions, just given the circumstances and given the players involved. One of the best I feel like we've seen in a long time. And if you just had to think this afternoon, let's say you're going to dream up a scenario for the ending of the Wolves game and say, we're up by a basket, Dallas needs a basket. What is the crazy scenario you could come up with? It very well could be this one. It's just going to be Luka and Kyrie passing it back and forth along the perimeter, and the Wolves are just going to defend it. It's basically going to be Ant and Jaden. And that would be a really dramatic ending. That would be one of those, if this game was a movie in Hollywood, they might write it like that to finish it out. It just, as you said, the most dramatic players in the most dramatic situation, given the pedigree that Doncic and Kyrie Irving have as individuals. I mean, to have that be the situation, and then it was like Kyrie at the point and Luka on the wing, and then they kind of switched, and they never really went away from those two positions. They just kind of maneuvered between those two spots, and I feel like they were caught off guard and stunned by the fact that they didn't even get off a shot. I mean, Dallas inbounded with 14.8 or 14.9 on the clock. So it wasn't like they had 4.5 seconds. I mean, they had almost 15 full seconds and never got a shot. And as you mentioned, the Jaden McDaniels tip into the backcourt, that took up 5 seconds on its own. It was just brilliant defensively.
Yeah, and Dallas is a really, really good offensive team. They take the most threes. They have the highest 3-point rate of any team in the league. They're 11th in 3-point percentage. And I mean, like adding Kyrie Irving to this team. I mean, this is another conversation, but we also saw some of Kyrie joining the Mavericks and them giving up some of the players that they did meant that their perimeter defense suffered, and that helped Anthony Edwards have a really good game as well. The other thing down the stretch that I thought was notable was Rudy Gobert had such a big game early, and the Timberwolves led in points of the paint. It was something like, it was basically 3/4 of the Wolves' points in the first half were scored in the paint. That's not much of an exaggeration. And they also ended up winning on the glass in this game. Dallas isn't a great rebounding team, and the Timberwolves did a good job there too. But then down the stretch, as the Mavs were getting back in the game, the Wolves were kind of forced to play small. It was like around a 10, 12-point game when they did. And the Mavs did come all the way back within a possession. But I thought Chris Finch pushed the right buttons there. And the Mavs were playing small, so the Wolves put Kyle Anderson in and tried to play small themselves. And ultimately, it ended up working. Kyle Anderson had that big poke away against Luka Doncic in the left corner final minute. And, again, like, it wasn't pretty. They still let the Mavs get back to within 3. But I thought the Wolves' small ball answer, which now, of course, if Karl-Anthony Towns is healthy, it's probably a different story. Towns is almost certainly on the floor there. But I thought that all the way down the stretch, the final several minutes of this game, I thought that was the right call by Finch, and it ended up working out. Even if it wasn't the prettiest thing, all the way through the end.
And Finch talks about after the game, the going to that lineup, and that it was not his intention to play the game out that way, to finish the game out that way, but it was working, and it was just, I mean, he stuck with it. And remember the game against Sacramento, where Sacramento went small and the Wolves kept Rudy Gobert in defensively in overtime, and it just blew up in their faces. And I wonder if this wasn't a direct adjustment based on that game, where Finch said, okay, we're going to go, we're going to go with this small lineup, and we're going to go back to Rudy. And then he just didn't have to. And instead of plugging Rudy in, because that's what you do at the end of the game. And I mean, he'd been great. Rudy was 9 for 9 in the game. He had a fantastic ball game. So it wasn't like that you kind of shy away from him because he just hadn't given you anything tonight. It was just a complete, we've got to stick with this, and look at Dallas personnel and look at what's working for the Wolves, and they stuck with it. And as you said, turned out to be the right call.
Yeah, and the Wolves, I mean, they built the lead using Rudy Gobert and dominating the paint, as we said already. I mean, he had 21 and 14 in the game, like you said, 100% shooting from the field, 9 of 9. That's how the Wolves built this 26-point lead. But this is also a roster that, especially if completely healthy with Karl-Anthony Towns in the fold, can play multiple ways. And if Rudy Gobert plays in this game, he still played 30 minutes, and he was a big reason why they built that lead. Was a plus 17 for the game. No other Timberwolves player was greater than a plus 9 for an individual plus minus. So clearly he had a positive impact on the game. And if you build the big lead, hopefully more often than not, you're not giving the whole thing back virtually. And so, like, his contributions still matter in this game. I think early on, early in this game, there was a lot to like about the Wolves offensively. Actually, for most of the game, it was really kind of like fourth quarter-ish, early fourth quarter when Kyrie went nuts. I mean, and the ball kind of got sticky for the Wolves a little bit. And obviously Edwards made some incredible shots too. We can talk more about him in a minute. But I thought for most of the game, the ball movement offensively, Mike Conley made probably 3 or 4 like passes and pick and roll game that D'Angelo Russell probably doesn't even try. Quite frankly. And I thought Conley was really kind of orchestrating pick and roll beautifully. He finished with 12 and 9. Rudy was in the right place at the right time. And it wasn't just limited to them. I thought Jaden McDaniels, Kyle Anderson, Taurean Prince, who started actually. Kyle Anderson came off the bench in this game. All those guys had really impressive passes. A lot of them to Gobert, but just in general, the ball movement for the Timberwolves was really, really good in this game.
It was. Finch called it, how did he word it? One of them, maybe a complete game offensively, because of all of the things you just mentioned and all of the people you just mentioned. And I felt like at times, so I was working this game tonight with Rebecca Brunson, who is obviously an incredibly accomplished basketball player in her own right. She was saying that it looked like Mike Conley was just orchestrating this offense. He was a maestro out there at several points of the game, just knowing who and when and where and what, and thinking the game and thinking this offense. That stood out to her as we were watching this game. And so whether it ended up being Conley throwing these direct passes or just him knowing how to get this whole thing moving and in sync and playing all the same instruments at the right time, or whatever the orchestra analogy should be in this instance, it was sort of all led and guided and directed by Mike Conley.
Let's talk about our title sponsors of the postcast tonight. That's our friends at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Another thing of note in this game, the Timberwolves pick and roll defense, we've seen them do this a couple times this year where, they generally play drop coverage with Rudy Gobert, where he's essentially dropping beyond, below the level of the screen, allowing the ball handler to penetrate just a little bit. And then the idea there is you're not giving up a lob, you're not giving up a three, and you're able to kind of contain the ball, right? And that's almost exclusively what the Wolves do, because Rudy Gobert is arguably the best in the league at least over the last several years. But against a team like the Mavs that had two dynamic ball handlers that can do everything in Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, the Wolves chose to play more high wall coverage, which is what they did for most of last year. And early in the game, I thought it was really, really, really well done by the Wolves. And there were a couple points where they got into some foul. They actually got into the penalty very early in the first quarter, but then did a really good job of defending without fouling for most of the rest of the first half. Came up again as an issue in the third, but for the most part, I thought their ball pressure and ability to contain at the point of attack was much better than what we'd seen, certainly just the last time out on Friday night. I was impressed with the Wolves' effort defensively. Obviously, the fourth quarter and Kyrie Irving kind of notwithstanding, but the first three quarters, point of attack defense was very good for Minnesota.
It was, and this team has talked several times throughout the year about toggling back and forth between defenses depending on who is on the court. I mean, who's on the Timberwolves court and not the opponent. They have been changing their defense based on basically if Rudy Gobert is on the court or not. And tonight might not have been as dictated by that. It'll be, I don't think that question got asked. As a matter of fact, I'm sure it didn't. At least the defense that was asked specifically to Chris Finch was about that final play and less about the specifics. But it is something that has been an issue for the Wolves at times this season, and it is something that Finch even talked about after after the Memphis game, that he said the defense just had really been slipping from them on the last couple of road trips. So to see strides in that on the last play, which we've already talked about, on the pick and roll coverage, which you were talking about there, Ben, like those could be huge steps forward for the Timberwolves, because there are areas where they had been hurting, and this road trip has been just bizarre. Think about these 4 games on this road trip. At Denver, the Wolves get blown out. At Utah in Salt Lake City, they win a tremendous game on the heels of the trade announcement. Memphis, just kind of lackluster, nondescript, kind of sleeping through the game. And then this one, like what? These were 4 very distinct, very different games. And if the one thing the Wolves can say they brought with them or picked up or improved or can carry forward is their defense, no matter what form it is, pick and roll, perimeter, anything, like that's a pretty big step, because you just had 4. What is something that is completely unique and stands on its own? That's the 4 games the Wolves just played on this road trip. How just bizarre. Yeah,
well, and they've been alternating wins and losses now for the last 8 games, which is not, for a while there it had been like winning 2 or 3, losing 1 or 2, but now we literally alternating wins and losses going back a couple of weeks to those back-to-back Kings games. Last thing about this one, Kyle Anderson came off the bench in this game and obviously was available and played and played. What did he play? 24 minutes off the bench. Taurean Prince started. Did Chris Finch address that at all? The change in the starting lineup, was it matchup based, or was it just to try something different, or did he mention that at all?
I didn't hear him talk about that. I'm trying to think. There are other people talking in my earpiece, Ben, so I'm going to give myself an out in case he talked about it and I didn't hear it.
Sure.
But no, I do not have the reasoning behind that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be something interesting to watch. And I mean, obviously it worked out in this game, and Kyle Anderson played great off the bench. I mean, he had 12, 5, and 4, a couple of steals in this game, was big down the stretch defensively, of course. And Taurean Prince had a really good game too. He had 5 assists in 22 minutes. I mentioned the passing earlier. He was a big part of that kind of, that consistent ball movement, ball moving side to side, lots of cutting, like just guys seemingly being in the right place at the right time, which is so funny because it was a brand new starting lineup. I mean, the Wolves have never had this starting 5 before. Mike Conley in just his second game with the Wolves. Taurean Prince, has started only a handful of times this year. So I thought that was really notable.
And a positive. I mean, a big positive to just show how cohesive this group can be, and you plug and play and you mix and match, and that's kind of the ideal characteristic of a lineup, to be able to do that, because then you can mold yourselves better based on the opponent that you're playing and based on the personnel that you have. I mean, look, the Wolves have had to dance around multiple injuries this season. I guess most teams in the NBA have at this point, but if you have that kind of lineup where you can plug and play depending on the night and what's needed, that's another huge bonus for this team. Taurean Prince got those 2 early fouls, and if that doesn't happen, who knows where this game goes. But that's a perfect example again of plug and play, because your intention is to play Taurean Prince heavy in this first quarter, first half, whatever, because he's in the starting lineup, and then boom, plans change pretty quickly when he picks up 2 fouls. But that was the portion of the game that the Timberwolves were dominating.
Yeah.
They dominated every bit of this game until the fourth quarter, and Kyrie decided that it was time to go. And he went. And the Wolves still won.
The Wolves still won. They get 2 days off again. Of course, now right in leading to the All-Star break, the Wolves get 4 out of 5 off days. But they play the Washington Wizards at home on Thursday night. That's a 7 p.m. tip. And then it is the All-Star break. The Wolves will open up the unofficial second half of the season, really kind of like the final third of the season, next Friday night at home against Charlotte. So they don't play another road game here for nearly 2 weeks, which will be great. And, of course, they've been alternating wins and losses, as we said a minute ago. So hopefully that doesn't continue on Thursday as they take on the Wizards headed into the All-Star break. We go live after nearly every Timberwolves game for the postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota. So be sure to subscribe to that channel to be notified when we go live. We also play the audio back on the Locked On Wolves channel. So if you miss it live, you can listen on any audio platform to Locked On Wolves to catch the postcast with Marney and myself. A big thank you for watching. A big thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.